Good morning, all. As you might have seen from the program, we are on a quite a tight schedule, so we're gonna get a start with the first panel today, which is looking into metadata and dissemination from a broader lens as compared to what we yesterday had with the Toad presentation, which was a bit more of a granular view on the publisher level needs. My name is Toby Steiner. I'm COO of Toad Up in Metadata. I'm going to be chairing today's panel with three fantastic speakers today. And yeah, I think without further ado, I will be passing over to our first speaker today, which is Harrison Inefuku. Harrison is the digital press lead at Iowa State University Library, where he guides the development and growth of the library's publishing program. He specializes in advancing inclusive, community-centered approaches to scholarly publishing. And over to you, Harrison.
Thank you.
That bio was written by Copilot, so if it's wrong, none of you know. So thank you so much. So I'm here to talk today about our book publishing program at Iowa State University Digital Press. We're a library publishing program. We publish books, journals, textbooks, and conference proceedings in subject areas that are represented at Iowa State University. So we have strong engineering and agricultural programs. We don't have a med school or a law school. So publications that we would not publish would be in those subject areas. I think I have slides. Hey.
That's
Cool. Yeah. Sure. So a little background on our program, or a little background to publishing at Iowa State. We did have a university press at Iowa State, the Iowa State University Press, that was founded maybe in the 1920s as Collegiate Press, and it lasted all the way through the 2000s, at which point it was merged into Blackwell, which is since merged into Wiley. So in the 19 years following that, we hadn't had any type of formal scholarly publishing program at Iowa State University. I came to Iowa State in 2012 to launch our institutional repository, and at that time we were using bPress Digital Commons, which is built on a journal publishing platform. So we informally also publish journals. Like many library programs in the U.S. start off as publishing journals through the institutional repository. In 2019, I moved out of the repository to focus primarily on launching the digital press as a formal operation. So we're a fully open access publisher. We're a digital first publisher. We've started doing some print on demand titles. But in terms of the platforms we use, we produce our books using Pressbooks, and we use Janeway as our interface to index the books and also to publish our journals and conference proceedings. That was largely spurred on by Elsevier's purchase of Digital Commons back 2018, 2019. So that really was the impetus to move towards open source, community-owned infrastructures. We publish a lot of variety of books at the digital press, not just scholarly monographs. As a library publishing program, our primary output is open textbooks, open educational resources. But in terms of the other books we publish, we have a range from one-off conference proceedings to children's pictures books and some other things. So I'm just going to run through some examples that we have. So this is the Mississippi River Valley, the course of American civilization. So if you want to read 800 pages on a discourse of the history of the Mississippi River, this book would be for you. It's not a peer-reviewed scholarly monograph. The professor is a professor emeritus that wanted to get like his last large publication out. So this we published a few years ago. I don't know what order I put that slide in, but so yeah, let's skip that. Excerpts from Life is a book by an undergraduate student, and it's some poems that she wrote. Water is Life is one of our picture books. It was written by a team of authors. Christina is a civil and environmental engineering faculty on campus. and she worked with authors and illustrators in Alaska to publish, to write and illustrate this book, which shares the story of water from an indigenous Alaska Native perspective. So one of the authors and the illustrator are both Alaska Native. And so this is a National Science Foundation funded project, and we're currently working on being able to distribute free copies of this book to libraries in Alaska. This is an example of an open educational resource. It's not a book per se, it's methodology cards that we make PDF versions of those cards available through our digital repository. This was funded through a one-time grant offering that we offered for OERs that related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So in addition to books that we publish using Janeway's book plugin, we have some book-like publications that we also provide access to. So in terms of what we do to kind of distribute the metadata out about these books, there's a variety of methods that we use depending on the type of resource that we're looking to share. And it's all pretty repetitive and cumbersome in terms of how we manage the metadata. So I mentioned we produce our books in Pressbooks, so that's the initial place where the metadata's put in. So as an example, I'll use a textbook, Plant Molecular Genetics and Bioengineering. This is a recent textbook by one of our agronomy faculty that we've published. He's one of our top authors in terms of producing textbooks through our program. After it's in the digital press, so the metadata is in Pressbooks, I copy and paste that metadata into Janeway as our primary catalog and indexing interface. And then I also then copy and paste that metadata into Crossref to register the DOI. We don't assign ISBNs to all of our books. Mostly our textbooks do not get ISBNs. So if I were to assign an ISBN, that's copying and pasting that metadata into Bowker, my identifiers, to get that ISBN issued. So once that's done, if I remember to update our JIRA report and let our catalogers know that a book has been published, the catalogers then go copy and paste that metadata into Primo or Alma. I don't really know what they do, but it gets into our catalog somehow. So this is an example of the record of for this book in our library's catalog. If it's a textbook, our Open Educational Resources librarian, Abby Elder, will then copy and paste that metadata into the Open Textbook Library. So this is what the book looks like in the Open Textbook Library. And also in OER Commons. So she's, again, copying and pasting that metadata into OER Commons. And I just popped into Tote last week, and I just tested out a few of our records in Tote. So this is an example of what it looks like in Tote. And as you can see, the levels of metadata we provide differ between the platform that we're putting the metadata into. So I think Janeway's book plugin isn't the most developed part of the platform. So the metadata that we have in there is pretty minimal. I think the cataloging that we do for it, which also gets it into OCLC and some other places that I should have asked them where it goes before I came here, that also is not super robust. So Tote has a really robust metadata that allowed me to put a lot more information about the book in here. But, you know, thinking about some of the problems that we encounter, some of the difficulties, you know, you heard me talking about copying and pasting the same information into at least 7 platforms is what I just rattled off. So improved metadata, having the more robust metadata available in Tote. I'm thinking about features that will be available in the next iteration. So having translations of that. So if we were able to put metadata for Water and Life in Native Alaskan languages, or we have books by Ukrainian authors, being able to share that metadata in Ukrainian as well. We have some bilingual books. Having translations of our metadata would be super useful instead of having to put like title in English / title in Ukrainian. automation. So if there was a plugin that we could take the metadata from Pressbooks and put it out into Tote and then distribute it where it needs to go, that would be absolutely amazing. Cut down the work for everyone. I wouldn't rely on, well, I have an employee now, but it wouldn't rely on me or Scott to have to update that. He's a lot better at it than I am. To update the board to let our catalogers and our OER library know that the book's ready to go out to different places. An expanded reach. I think since a lot of our books are not formally peer-reviewed, our books program isn't developed to the point where we have things like an editorial board that reviews submissions. Our books aren't eligible for inclusion in places like DOAB, but having something like Tote set up where there's a potential to start getting in those places once our books program is developed to the point where we would be able to do so would be super beneficial. So I think that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Harrison. And I realize I forgot to mention in the beginning that the framing of this panel today is, I think the unofficial subtitle would be the mysterious ways of book metadata. So we wanted to actually look at, the starting point from the publisher, as Harrison has described in the case of Iowa State. And you've already seen with that presentation of Harrison's, how complicated things are even at the start, at the publisher level. And now what we wanted to do is to take the next step of that metadata workflow, or the flow of metadata basically, to look at a wider or a larger or a broader perspective of metadata and dissemination research. And this will be presented by our next panelist here. I'm happy to introduce, just a second for my notes. Happy to introduce Edgar Alejandro García Valencia. Edgar is an editor and academic with a master's degree in Mexican literature from the University of Veracruz, a PhD in literature from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and a specialization in Hispanic philology from the Spanish National Research Council. He was head of the publishing houses of Ciesas and the University of Veracruz, and was a founding member and national coordinator of the Altexto network, which brings together the publishing houses of universities and higher education institutions in Mexico. He's affiliated with the Center of Cultural and Communication Studies at the University of Veracruz, where he works on topics related to past and present literary and publishing practices, and is also a member of the National System of Researchers. He's part of the Cartografía de la Edición Académica in Iberoamérica project, which investigates the state of academic publishing in Iberoamérica. And with today's presentation, he will be sharing insights gleaned from the first phase of that project. So over to you, Edgar.
Thank you very much. Todd, I would like to thank to CAPIM in general and Todd in particular to the invitation to the research group in which we are involved as a community of editors, publishers, and academics who have voluntarily joined to project Radiografía of the academic publishing in Iberoamerica. All the people involved, and I want to explain the current project as a preliminary findings we have reached by now. I will begin by talking a little about the previous project, where we started with quantitative and exploratory research in the first part, followed by a data analysis and discussion with working groups. The project was the cartography of the academic publishing in Iberoamerica. There we want to learn about the production of academic books in the region, distinguish them from the rest of the publishing output, and learn about the contribution and growth of scholarly books over a period of time. We identify a core group of academic publishers beyond the university presses, and the contribution of the university presses, as well as some premises that started from rethinking what we assume to be the requirements for an academic publication. To see the results, you can link the QR code there. And When we finished that project, we realized that we were working not only with productions. We realized that fits forward that the ISBN platform had errors in its standardizations, duplication problems, and errors attributable not only to the publishers, but even to the content in some of its drop-down list field options in the database itself. Then we have the production, but now we know about distribution and reception, something that had outlined it as a classical scheme in the box studies. Cool metadata as a methodological element help us to find that other spirit of reception in detail. Of course it could. We had the first great example at home, the University of Rosario in Colombia, University Press, to structure and track the location in its digital and physical sales, as well as library choirs. They told us about all the productions, not only where it was stored, but also what we felt as most important, what was being read, what interests were covered by certain catalogs. This was of great importance for us, first of all, from the point of view of those involved in the book ecosystem, because it could help to better define some of the catalog's offerings to take better decisions, and knowing in which academic centers outside Latin America this content is consumed. But it will also tell us about some general trends in academic topics, authors or publisher collaboration networks, and publishing centers beyond the local level. There are some of the questions we tried to answer, but now come the problems. So rather than coming up with solutions, we are starting from how to carry out these interventions with minimal data. One of the most notable findings is the lack of structured data. So we have moved from a census to cartography to building a network, the radiography, to see how this individual skeleton is structured and how it moves in the publishing world. But we will be able to see this in its local articulations. The problem arises when we lack these articulations, not because they do not exist, but because there is no data to see them. The pilot program, the Universidad de Rosario University Press in Bogotá, Colombia, had the information provided by its distributors, but this wealth of information highlighted the lack of data in the rest of the publishing community in Latin America. So that is a task we now have. The study draws on a variety of bibliographic and commercial systems to capture a complete digital footprint. The agency of ISBN registry, the SORLALC in Latin America for almost all the countries, publishing and commercial manager like CIME and Siglo del Hombre, and now Cielo Books, and bibliographic systems as WorldCat and OpenAlex. Data is collected both through an app integrations and direct uploads, ensuring a robust database for analysis. The project used a relational model developed in Python and SQL, divided into two distinct phases. Data exploration, initial analysis involving 22 publishers to identify the availability of information, and automatization and scale expansion to 70 publishers, and data cleansing and the creation of comprehensive dashboards. The relational model connects tables of authors, publishers, libraries, and sales using the ISBN as a primary key to link local records to the global ecosystem.
to the analysis of more than
6,000 ISBN records and 5,000 books reveal significant information about the state of Ibero-American academic publishing. High coverage of descriptions, to 97%, and keywords, to 74%, as generally well maintained. There is a poor use of persistent identifiers with only 34% of DOI coverage. Inconsistency as data standardization remains a challenge with spelling, variants, and non-standardized language code, and missing context, gaps in publication data such as country information, gender collection. To
emphasize the
standardized metadata transform books into quantifiable data assets, essential for institutional evaluation. Standardization will be the key to evolving together as a community. In conclusion, we have new digital tools to explore the production, distribution, and reception of scholarly books, but we are still troubled with the same question posed by authors such as Robert Darnton in his classic, What is the History of Books?, who asked us, how do the books reach readers, and what do the readers make of them? Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Edgar. Really fascinating outcomes. And then looking again, or taking a step back at the flow of metadata, we wanted to also invite a perspective from libraries, really. And this is where Emma Booth comes into play here. Really happy to introduce Emma Booth, who leads a team of metadata and cataloging specialists at the University of Manchester Library. Together with her team, she works to ensure that the provision of quality standardized metadata is an intrinsic part of library content, acquisitions and collection development processes. Emma is responsible for the overall management of metadata activities, for ensuring the discoverability of new and existing content in Manchester's modern collections, including embedding open access resources into the library's discovery interface. Her professional and research interests include the future-proofing of bibliographic metadata, such as looking at quality, interoperability, and ethics, and developing sustainable open metadata infrastructures for enabling equitable access to the scholarly resources that support teaching, learning, and research, and ensuring their long-term sustainability and accessibility. And over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Toby. So hopefully I'm going to be able to kind of demystify what those librarians do with metadata and explain to you today a little bit about the challenges that we sometimes face when trying to embed open access books into library collections. So as Toby said, my team has historically, the work we do is centered around pay-to-read content, but increasingly we are wanting to embed open scholarly content, such as open access books, open textbooks, OERs, and the like. Without further ado, whilst the publishers of open access books make their content digitally and freely available online, and there is obviously a lot of work going on, as Harrison explained, to copy and paste all of that metadata into various dissemination systems. It doesn't make those open access books inherently discoverable, especially to libraries and library users. Discoverability still depends on the effective dissemination and ingestion of high quality metadata, and there are challenges across three overlapping dimensions: getting that metadata into digital platforms and the book supply chain, getting that metadata into library systems, and fundamentally ensuring that that metadata is robust enough to support discoverability across all stakeholders. So to make open access books discoverable via library systems, libraries need to be able to access high quality, accurate bibliographic metadata that they can ingest into their systems, index it for searching, and make it available to library users via their discovery layers. And when this works well, open access books can appear seamlessly alongside licensed content and physical publications, and course leaders and academics can easily adopt them for teaching, link them to reading list software, add them to virtual learning environments, and they become just as vital a part of library collections as paywall content does. Unfortunately, obtaining that high-quality metadata is not always straightforward for libraries, primarily because the supply chain for books and their metadata is designed around transactional acquisitions processes, so the economics of units of sale. And open access books don't really fit into this model. And they're often not included on traditional book procurement platforms that libraries use. And if they do appear on those platforms, the established acquisition workflows that librarians use don't really support making free-to-read content discoverable, because they're based on the idea of having to purchase an access license in order to receive what's called a shelf-ready MARC record. So libraries need alternative methods for acquiring metadata for open access books that don't depend on these transactional acquisition and book purchasing processes. And these methods need to support librarians to proactively ingest the metadata for open access books into their library systems as smoothly as possible and as soon as possible following publication. And this has to work at scale and not on a per title basis. So in my experience, the methods available for ingesting open access books metadata often require a bit of a compromise between metadata quality and the efficiency or automation that's available. And this is due to the complex nature of the metadata supply chain. Open access book metadata flows from publishers to libraries through a variety of stakeholders, and Harrison alluded to many of the places where they are sharing metadata. And these stakeholders include content aggregators, discovery system knowledge base providers, and bibliographic data agencies such as OCLC, or here in the UK, BDS. And these stakeholders interact with one another and with libraries through a complex transfer of metadata and also content. And the extent to which they share data with one another really depends on the commercial relationships that exist between them, and sometimes also between their parent companies. So the stakeholders in the pipeline are using very different standards and schema for data exchange, and they have different metadata requirements to support what they're trying to do with that metadata. So, as many of you are already aware, the industry standard data format for the commercial book trade is ONIX, and the industry standard for the communication of e-resource title list and coverage data that most knowledge-based providers use is KBART. But as libraries, we're a bit different. We use a standard format for the communication of bibliographic information in machine-readable format called MARC 21. And there are differences in the controlled vocabularies and the persistent identifiers that these different stakeholders in their, use in their respective domains. In publishing, you may be familiar with THEMA and BISAC subject headings, but over in libraries, we still use Library of Congress subject headings, or FAST headings, or perhaps MESH if it's medical subject heading. So every time metadata is converted from one format to another, detail can be lost. And this is particularly true if a less extensive format is used. For example, KBART is really designed for the transfer of title list and coverage data. It does not include fields for subject headings, context notes, or summaries and abstracts. So if metadata is passed into KBART from the publisher into a knowledge base, it can reach a library in quite a poor state. Example on screen here. The library receives metadata through their knowledge-based provider, and usually this is quite an automated way. It's an activation of a collection or of a title. And the idea is that it's streamlined and easy for the library. But if the metadata ends up looking like this, you wonder, was there any point in activating it? Because who's going to be able to find that? And this causes not just problems for discoverability and therefore usage, but also if this is what your metadata looks like in library systems for open access books, people are not necessarily going to have the best opinion of that publication. They're not really going to understand what it is in the context of the bibliographical scholarly ecosystem. And if the paywalled content that we have in our library systems is much fuller, more detailed metadata, they might go and choose that instead. So this is a problem, and it causes a lot of issues for libraries in terms of trying to enrich and improve that metadata, and also in terms of trying to make it fit for purpose for doing collection data analysis to inform collection development. And we incur a lot of hidden costs when doing this in terms of the labour that we need to do, that we need to undertake in terms of enriching metadata and supporting users who are struggling to find resources. So with all of these issues from using these intermediaries in the supply chain, it might seem kind of a no-brainer to just go straight to the publisher and say, please give us your metadata. And this is possible for some publishers. In fact, many publishers have partnerships with libraries. Manchester University Press have a partnership with the University of Manchester Library, and we create all of their MARC records to the best possible library gold standard. And we make those records CC0 and available for anybody to download for free from Manchester Hive, which is the platform for Manchester University Press content. And this can work really well, but it's not always possible for publishers to do this, particularly smaller, scholar-led, independent presses that don't necessarily have the staffing, the technical expertise, and probably don't even know what Mark 21 is. So basically, this means that this is why the intermediaries exist in the supply chain, because they have developed their services to offer automated workflows that can create those MARC records for libraries, but they rely on that commercial relationship and libraries paying for those MARC records. And this leads to another problem, a lack of metadata openness. So even when publishers release metadata as CC0, open licenses into the ecosystem, it can become restricted when it's passed through an intermediary whose business model relies on selling access to metadata to libraries. And for OA Box, this creates a real paradox. The metadata that describes open access books becomes enclosed and restricted, even as the content remains free to read. And licensing restrictions can often be quite unclear. Libraries are not always sure if they can share their metadata, and even if they themselves have enriched it and contributed it to the data set, such as sending their own MARC records to WorldCat. This severely limits library collaboration on metadata enrichment and linked data projects. It prevents bibliographic data sets from being shared for computational analysis and research, such as what Edgar was describing. And it also limits academic libraries' ability to make connections between the content they've acquired for their library collections in MARC format, metadata in their library management system, and the research outputs being produced by their institution that are described in Dublin Core metadata in their Institutional Research Repository, or CRIS. The two sets of metadata are essentially siloed from one another. So as metadata travels through the pipeline, quality can degrade, interoperability issues and restrictions prevent sharing, and this causes leaks and blockages in the pipeline that undermine the openness and usefulness of metadata and reduce the discoverability of open access books. So I've talked a lot about challenges there. There are quite a lot of them. I do want to talk about the potential solutions that community-led open infrastructure can offer. We heard a lot yesterday about Tote and everything they're offering already to publishers in terms of reducing the pain of creating high-quality metadata right from the beginning. And Tote provides open community-led infrastructure that supports publishers of all sizes, even those smaller ones that have fewer resources or technical expertise. And the outputs are available openly to meet the needs of everybody in the supply chain, aggregators, knowledge bases, and crucially, libraries. So Tote can help to repair the metadata pipeline, but they can also offer an alternative, more open route for metadata to flow from publishers to libraries without enclosure by those intermediaries I've been talking about. So earlier this year, the Tote team published the International Metadata Recommendations and Platform-Specific Requirements Report. And this is a comprehensive guide outlining essential and desirable metadata elements for open access books and chapters across all stakeholders, platforms, and use cases. And I was really pleased to be able to contribute the library perspective and to talk a bit about the MARC environment. I'm hopeful this report will provide clarity for all stakeholders in the supply chain when navigating metadata standards, and that the two-tier metadata framework defined in the recommendations will help to support better interoperability and improved metadata quality across the entire ecosystem. But I think what is quite important to note is that the report emphasizes the need for open licensing for open access books metadata to ensure that metadata remains open for sharing and reuse. And this builds on a statement from the International Coalition of Library Consortia from 2022 that argued that metadata is essential for content discovery, knowledge creation, and for fulfilling the public mission of libraries. So metadata describing library collections shouldn't be treated as copyrightable and should be freely shareable and reusable in most situations. So this statement called on all organisations, whether they're commercial or not-for-profit, to respect libraries' rights to use, reuse, adapt and share the metadata that describes their collections without restrictions. At the time, in 2022, a number of UK organisations endorsed this statement, including Research Libraries UK and Wealth in Wales. But I have to say that not a great deal has changed since then. We still have a lot of pain points when it comes to contractual restrictions upon bibliographic metadata sharing and reuse. And the reality is that the situation is unlikely to change with the MARC environment unless a credible, scalable, and legally workable alternative to the current metadata pipeline can be developed, something that's more open, more dynamic, and more community-driven and governed. So looking ahead to the future of open access books and the future of open metadata, I would like to see libraries working more closely with open infrastructure providers like Tote and the COPIM community to collaborate on metadata creation and enhancement with the outputs being without the outputs being captured and locked away by closed proprietary systems. It would be great if Tote could develop more library-facing workflows to enable automated ingestion of that high-quality open metadata in their systems directly from Tote into library management systems, and this would provide libraries with that trustworthy alternative data source that bypasses the restrictions, inconsistencies, and costs of existing proprietary sources. I also think this could be a two-way flow. Libraries have a lot to offer in becoming involved in shaping and maintaining open metadata infrastructure built on fair data principles. And we have expertise that can be leveraged to enrich community-owned data sets for broader community benefit. We don't just want to be enriching our own institutional silos. So I do think it's time for us to challenge the inequitable nature of the metadata supply chain, and I'll end with a nod to the Collaborative Metadata Enrichment Task Force, COMET, and their model for collective metadata stewardship that embraces collective responsibility for maintaining the metadata ecosystem for collective benefit. So the model does focus primarily on the stewardship of persistent identifier metadata, such as DOIs, but I think we could consider all bibliographic metadata in the same light. Metadata is not an individual burden to be borne by its creators. It should be created, managed, enriched, and maintained by community stewardship. And this approach reflects a broader truth. Scholarly communication is a collective endeavour. All participants in knowledge production and knowledge dissemination should therefore be empowered to contribute their expertise and authority to the production of a complete, accurate and open scholarly record. And the question is, how brave are we and when can we start building this?
Thanks so much, Emma. I think before moving to archiving, we still have a couple of minutes to address some questions. So let's open the floor really and see if there's any feedback from the audience.
Cheers, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I have a question about the concept of copywriting metadata, which I have actually come across a couple of weeks ago. So what is the copyrighted things? Is it the kind of format and the way the information is styled, quote unquote, or is it the content itself, like 2006, or the title? That's basically my question.
So I'm not an expert on this, and as I mentioned in my presentation, for libraries, it's sometimes very unclear exactly what they can and cannot do with metadata and where the restrictions on reuse and sharing are. There's legal precedent, particularly in the US, that it is not possible to copyright facts. And so metadata kind of would fall under that. But what we have seen from certain bibliographic data agencies is that they try to assert ownership over a database of metadata. And they will only allow individuals who are paying a subscription to them to use that data and share that data with one another. So if you went and took the data from WorldCat and went and gave it to somebody who wasn't an OCLC customer, you could get into big trouble. And we have seen them become quite litigious in terms of taking people to court over this, particularly when Clarivate launched Metadata, which would be a kind of more open rival product. So I don't think that you can copyright a MARC record per se, but you can restrict what people do with it. And there's precedent for that. And what we see in some records from vendors like BDS or OCLC is that they've actually put a license in the record, the MARC record, in a field that then says, you can't delete these fields, you can't share this with anyone that's not our customer, and you cannot remove reference to this license. And when you sign a contract with one of these suppliers, you are agreeing to those terms, essentially. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's my understanding.
Really helps. Thank you.
Hi, Steel Wagstaff. I want to say thank you for the perspectives here. I found myself feeling both empathetic and increasingly angry as I was hearing what you were describing. Honestly, like, it feels enraging that you would have to manually re-enter metadata 7 or 8 times in different platforms, and it feels enraging that metadata quality would deteriorate as it's being passed through commercial actors who are intentionally obfuscating or hiding elements before they get to you. From our side, on the publisher platform perspective, one of the key things has been making sure that metadata is available and reachable via API. There was an acronym I think you mentioned, and this piece is really important, and it's been extremely difficult for us as we work with people like EBSCO or like Clarivate. They want our metadata, they want the publisher metadata, but they can't be bothered to produce an API or interoperate. And so the acronym that I want everybody to feel like in the library community is demand an API, an open API. And what we mean by that is let the applications talk to one another to pass the data through. The reason why Tote feels so exciting to me is there is an open API, and once the data comes in, it remains open and you can request it. Machines can request it from one another to simplify that process. From your point of view, I guess Emma or Harrison, what would be the preferred flow or outcome in how you both generate metadata on the publisher side and how you receive the metadata from the library side?
To the start.
Sure. I think, well, to address your first point about APIs, or a lot of our systems also provide access to metadata through OAI. I think a lot of our systems have those in place, but I think it also takes staff time to be able to get those systems to talk to each other. I know, like, OLH being a UK-based, university-based house, from what I hear, UK higher education is even less funded than US higher education. So in terms of development priorities or development staff time available to build out plugins that could help facilitate the interchange of metadata and other information, be able to find staff hours to devote to that can be a challenge. And even within our library, we've had staffing reductions and things like that. So even though our metadata services department is working on this, they don't have the same staff hours to devote to things that they might have had a decade ago when they had a more fully staffed department. I think in terms of how the metadata flows, I think I'm pretty agnostic on that, as long as I don't have to enter it in more than once. Or, well, I mean, you heard my flow. Me or my colleagues don't have to enter the information more than once. So if we're using Pressbooks, for example, to produce most of our books, if that information could flow from Pressbooks into something like Tote, that could then be the clearinghouse or distributor that would send it where it needs to go, I think that would be ideal. It definitely would be a lot better than the current copy and pasting. I think my Control-C on the keyboard, those letters have rubbed off the keyboard.
So excuse me. From the library perspective, I think we are often in the same situation that Harrison explains in terms of lack of staffing resources or technical expertise. And, as a metadata librarian, I have no say what library management system we have. when we go to tender for a system, metadata is probably quite low on the list of priorities when you're considering which system to go for. And the kind of market leaders currently are OCLC, WorldShare, and Ex Libris from Clarivate. And whilst they say, oh, we listen to our customers, vote for things in the ideas exchange, you know, you only have so much power to influence things. And if you are, you know, understaffed, under-resourced, and constantly being asked to do more with less, it's quite difficult to find that energy to lobby and consistently badger Ex Libris to please enrich this collection in the community zone. So it can be quite difficult. On the API front, I completely agree with you. I think there should be far more possibilities for libraries to have agency in connecting APIs to their library management system from publishers, from content providers, and not have to go through these intermediaries that are causing all the issues. When I asked our system support librarian to have a look at the Tote API to see if we could pipe metadata directly into Primo, he had a look at it and he said that it wouldn't work. He couldn't get it to work. So for us, we're still tied into this sort of MARC environment. If we don't use the knowledge base providers' records in the community zone or central discovery index, we want our own local MARC records. So that means there needs to be an output from Tote, and they already have an output for MARC records, but it is a bit manual at the moment to get those records. So I would like to see automation there, either via an API that actually works with our system, or via delivery to an FTP that we can then send an import profile to go and grab those records. Because that's what we do with OCLC Collection Manager. It's an FTP server where the records get uploaded, and then we run an import profile that goes and retrieves those records and puts them into our system and kind of matches and merges depending on whether they're new or updated records. So yeah, it would be great to have that side of things and be able to use that as an alternative.
I hear you saying a last mile or the last kilometer from the record into your... I didn't catch that part. The OCLC catalog service?
Yes, so one of the services they have is called Collection Manager. So they have Record Manager and Collection Manager.
You said what's in your library.
Yes, so whether it's paywall content or open access content, you go into Collection Manager and search, you know, open book publishers, and there will be a collection that you can activate, and all the MARC records associated with that collection, you can then get them delivered to your folder, subfolder on the FTP, and send an import profile to go and grab them. So actually that is what we're doing currently for a lot of open access books, and it kind of breaks my heart a bit that I'm doing that. But it's the most efficient automated way to ingest open access books metadata at scale that is of good enough quality to support discoverability. So my hands are tied at the moment.
Any more first?
This is from online. One challenge I've seen is that the same book can come into the catalog from different routes and different metadata qualities via Dublin Core, MARC, publisher metadata, causing duplication. Often the best record is not prioritized. Is there a good way that we might address this?
Yes, this is true, and it does kind of depend on what library management system and discovery layer you have. So my perspective is we are Alma Primo library, and in Primo there's something called dedupe and Ferberization, and this does not always work. The idea is that it will take the metadata from those various sources that you talked about and be able to work out, this is describing the same publication, or this is describing a different edition, and group them together for ease of use. And it's supposed to work across formats as well. So if you've got the print version and access to an ebook or open access ebook, it should be able to kind of merge the records for display. But really, this does depend on like the metadata being as good quality as possible, so that there are enough matching points between the record sets, so that the algorithm can work out that yes, they are describing the same thing. And that doesn't always happen. It really depends on the source metadata that you're getting, where you're getting it from, and what's been done to it on its journey to the library. And within our own systems, what we try and do is ensure that we've got sort of matching ISBN data, but ISBNs are not unique identifiers, and there are lots of ISBNs for the same publication in the ebook space particularly, and so that can cause a lot of pain in terms of incorrect ISBNs being in the record that then you get book chapter metadata showing from the Central Discovery Index, you try and access it and it's gone to a completely different book, and you're like, how has that happened? And it's just a rogue ISBN has encroached into a record. So yeah, we have to do a lot of that kind of cleanup and maintenance and, you know, what we call kind of normalization of the metadata to ensure that duplication isn't so frustrating for the end user. So yeah, it's a lot of work. It keeps us busy.
There's one more question in the audience over here.
Hi, Gareth Cole, Open Research Manager, University of Exeter. It's a question for Edgar, if I may. You spoke about kind of the challenges of standardization or the lack of standardization in some of the metadata, some of the information. I was just wondering, is that a problem with the standards or a problem with the way the standards are being implemented or not implemented in the kind of the areas that you're looking at?
I think both. In the ISBN database, we find that the language roll down standard was wrong. So we observed that the Sorlalku management, almost the whole database from Latin America, and then correct that because the regional languages of each country doesn't exist, and it appears Spanish or Japanese, and but not Nahuatl or some regional language who publish books. And we have in Mexico we have 62 language, and Colombia 15. So we have a lot of languages, and that's an example of what in the source we have some mistakes, and that are increasing each step. So and even the publishers doesn't have, I think it's the last question and answer with the publishers, you know, and university process, they doesn't use like an OMP management for the books. They use only the 30%. So how they could cover all the use of the management of metadata without some platform to help is difficult for smaller publishers.
There's one more question over there.
Thank you. So Simon Baines, University of Aberdeen. I've got a question for Emma specifically. You talked about your frustration with system vendors and getting development requests through, and I think we all share your pain on that one. But what I was reflecting on was that you mentioned Alma, and Manchester was one of the very early adopters of Alma. It was just going on into live when I arrived way back in 2011 at Manchester. So without asking you to share anything that ought to be confidential, has Manchester gone through retendering processes since 2011?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay,
no.
because obviously that's a long time to have Alma. I suppose what I was wondering is, you know, have you explored in any way whether there are other system vendors out there who might actually do more to support you from your perspective than Alma does?
As I said, yeah, I'm not aware of any of that. I know that we have been looking at different systems for more on the repository side of things, and for our digital collections, be they images or text-based, and there is a project undergoing at the minute which is looking at all of those different systems and the pain of having to do copy-paste of metadata across them. But I don't believe that there is any such retendering or reassessment happening when it comes to our use of Alma and Primo.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are close to the hour, so I wanted to thank all of our speakers today for their presentations and for you, the audience, for listening and engaging with the topic. I hope it was a useful session for you, and with that I want to hand over to the next panel with archiving, I think.
There's a break.
There's a break, sorry. Right, we've got a break. Enjoy.